Hello, my name is Jennifer Woody Collins, and I'm here to talk today about grading from the given to the possible and by thinking critically in injury and violence prevention. So a little bit about me. I have worked in injury and violence prevention for about 15 years in both the state health department and university research settings. And after that, I went on, just recently completed a PhD in communication studies. And for me, what that looks like is I did a lot of work studying public health professionals and the ways they communicate to create identities for themselves as professionals and as the field in general. So I'll talk a little bit about that more in a moment. But to get us started, I'd like to just share this quote that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So the reason I start with this is because I want us to think about what is it that we are getting right now within injury and violence prevention. And one of the things I want us to really hone in on is the result of inequities in health. So I doubt that anyone is unaware of the various data and issues that have started to be more prevalently presented in public health discourse. But just thinking that whatever which is that certain people with certain identities, and I'm talking specifically about race and racism, experience worse health outcomes than other people. So that is what we get in the system that we have. And so I want us to think about how we could go about changing that. So I also want us to think a little about the given. So this is back to what our system is. So these are some terms and ideas that I think express from my research and reading I've done. What are the values of public health? What is it that we think is good and we care about? So I'm arguing that we like certainty, we like expertise, efficiency, progress, rationality, and we have a belief in the ability of science to solve our social problems. So I think one example that can kind of wrap a lot of these ideas up is we like evidence-based projects, evidence-based research and programs that we can have some certainty about our efforts creating progress or something better in an outcome relatively efficiently, because we're not just feeling around in the dark. We have done some research and thought about and figured out what we can do to make something better and quickly, kind of, right? Efficiently. And so when we uphold and laud public health evidence-based practice, these are kind of all the values that we are expressing that we care about and we like. I do not want folks coming away from this thinking that I don't like evidence-based practice or that it's not good, because that is not at all what I'm saying. I just want us to, in general, start to have some awareness about the values, beliefs, norms that we kind of take for granted in the profession of public health. So again, back to this system and getting what we get. So the racial disparities that we have arisen in the context of how we do our work. Now, the ways that we're working have resulted in what we get. So Ford and Arimbuha, more than a decade ago, argued that our discipline's norms and conventions help to reinforce existing racial and other hierarchies. So they're specifically talking about knowledge production. So how do we figure out what we know? And within public health and injury and violence prevention, a lot of the data that we use and the information that we use is based on numbers, quantitative numbers. And we like to think that it isn't necessarily subjective. There's not bias, right? If there's numbers, it can't be biased. But what Ford and Arimbuha want us to really understand is that scientific knowledge is a socially constructed phenomenon. A lot of times researchers can believe that the objectivity of their scientific method precludes bias in their research, but what they're saying is that that is not true. So one, kind of meta thing for me is that even the belief and the practices of the scientific method is in itself a choice, right? That's a bias towards a certain way of thinking and being in the world. If you believe in and like the scientific method, that is a bias. Same if you don't like it, right? So we're just trying to really draw out how the ways we do our work and our science did not just appear out of nowhere, out of whole cloth, but they were culturally and socially situated in history and time. So we want to do better, right? I think that most folks who get into the field are in it because they want to do something helpful in the world. I know I did. And we have a paper in the journal Injury Prevention that has this title: "We Must Do Better Science, Addressing Racism to Improve Health and Safety for All People." So I wanted to really highlight this particular passage where we can, what they're talking about by doing better. Now, these are injury and violence prevention people. They say we can produce better injury and violence prevention science, leading to better injury and violence prevention solutions. And to me, I read this and I can see the values that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation apparent in that statement. So we are going to keep relying on science and getting better at science to get to solutions. So this framework is still saying the answer is science, and it's just doing it better, right? We can figure it out, and that we're going to find solutions. That means we're going to have some certainty, like a completion. Something is going to be solved with our science. So that's progress again, and belief that science can improve society. On the other hand, we have this quote from Garcia et al. And these folks are not injury and violence prevention people, but they are looking critically at the use of quantitative or numerical data. And what they argue is that quantitative approaches cannot be adopted for racial justice aims without a reckoning that considers historical, social, political, and economic power relations. Only then can a quantitative approach be reimagined and rectified. What I'm taking from this is, within injury and violence prevention, with our desire to do better, we need to radically rethink our whole framework of how we go about figuring out what is better and how to get there. So currently, we value quantitative or numerical data. Ford and Arambuja, again, more than a decade ago, argued that qualitative data, which often are in the form of narrative and explains the how and what, gets into the qualities, if you will, of a certain situation. They argue that that personal reflection is an important source of information. That might sound a little funny to you. So you can sit around and think, like, what is it that I think about something? But I am saying, and they are saying, that that is important, an important and valid source of information. When used appropriately, it can provide rich insights that are unobtainable from quantitative data. For instance, while critical self-reflection is invaluable in helping investigators identify their personal biases relative to a project, quantitative data is not helpful for this purpose. So again, if we're talking about changing the system of what is given, we're going to need to change the whole framework of how we think and do our work. So we have sort of a bit of a comparison here, just to recap some of what is given in our current situation. So on the left, we have an uncritical acceptance of scientific methods as being objective. On the other hand, we would like to recognize that there is subjectivity in scientific method. One side, we have a lack of awareness that public health was and is continuously created based on social, historical, and cultural factors. And I'd like us to move to a place where we have an awareness that our discipline is culturally situated and subjective, i.e., there can be bias. There is quantification, and numerical data is seen as more valuable currently. And what I would like to see is data is used that can foster understandings and answer questions that we have. So we are more open to different kinds of knowledge production so that we can include more ideas, more voices, more perspectives, and come up with different ways to approach the complex issues that we face. So Hardin and Nicarbia say that disciplinary self-critique is an important first step in anti-racist counter-framing. And they say, we cannot build a more equitable and just future using the same white supremacist tools that were used to create the systems of disadvantage that we seek to dismantle. And over here in the purple, we have Audre Lorde. I just wanted to give a shout out to her because she is a really important Black feminist thinker who this idea is, they're echoing her words with this idea. And I just don't want to neglect to mention her. But we can't do the same thing and expect to get different results. Good old definition of insanity. Okay, so what do we do to get to what's possible? I have here 3 not easy steps. So sorry, they're not easy. But number 1, we're going to start from a place that we believe and accept that racism permeates public health research and practice. And that is the fact that we do not need to prove further. We do not need to wait before we have evidence. We just need to accept that and act with that as a fact, as our groundwork. Again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't investigate that, but we shouldn't be like, is this really an issue? No, start there. Step 2, think critically and become comfortable with complexity, uncertainty, and the discomfort of self-inquiry. So there isn't any way easy to get out of this system that we are currently in. And we can't use the same kinds of methods and approaches that we've traditionally used. If we want something different, we have to do different. So that is going to be uncomfortable. A lot of times, who likes to look at themselves and realize that they've done something harmful? I don't. But it is part of the work. It is necessary. Another thing to know is that it is not ever going to be finished, fixed, or solved in our lifetime. Hopefully, maybe someday, right? But for now, we are in such a position that so many people haven't even really started thinking about these ideas that we got a long way to go. So hard, long work. The last thing that needs to happen is that you need to establish a regular self-reflective practice. So regular means that you do it frequently and consistently. Daily is best. You can do whatever works for you. You can write down in a journal or on the computer. You can do yoga, you can meditate. You can have a colleague that you use as an accountability partner to maybe have a lunch once a week where you talk about these concepts. The main thing is that you do it and you do it frequently. So I'd like to take just a moment to do this self-reflection. So what does I mean by self-reflection? How does that work? And so that can work in a lot of different ways, but I'm going to ask you this question first. First thing, there's a spectrum here on the left. I would like you to think about how much you agree and understand with what I just talked about in the presentation. So on the left, we have, I don't think I understand it or I don't agree. And on the right, we have, I totally agree, I get it, I'm with it. And then there can also be the choice of, I'm somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. So just take a minute and think to yourself in your head, where am I on the spectrum based on what you just heard me talk about? Okay, got that? So now what we're going to do is I'm going to explain what I'd like you to do, and then I'm going to ask you to pause and do it. So first, let me explain. I would like you to reflect on how you answered the question about agreeing with and understanding. So think about why you came to the answer that you did. So maybe you said, I don't understand or I don't agree. And you were like, well, I know all this other stuff that, goes against what she said. So that's why, right? Or maybe you were like, I totally get it. I'm with it. And you think that because you've read things, you've heard things, you've had personal experiences, whatever. But just think how you got to your answer. And then, more importantly, consider how it makes you feel. So think about the feelings that came up for you when thinking about your response to my presentation. You're feeling likely a mixture of things, and I don't want to say these are discrete emotional categories, but I'm just giving some examples of being angry, indignant, superior, happy, sad. But I think it probably is a mixture, but I just want you to think about it. So now is the time, hit your pause button, get out some paper or use your computer, whatever it is, but write out the answers to these questions. This is what reflection looks like, one way. Okay, so we're back. Thank you for doing that, reflecting practice. And now we're going to take it even a step further. We're going to reflect on your reflection experience. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So again, I'd like you to write this stuff down. So let me tell you what we want to say. What is it like to think about yourself? And about your work and your profession of public health. So I've said some things that can be challenging, that can be, disputed or whatever, and some things that maybe are indicating that people who work in public health are complicit in racism. That is an underlying thing that I'm saying in this presentation. How does that make you feel? If you got to that place in your critical reflection, how does that make you feel about yourself and about this profession? Is reflecting easy for you, or is it difficult? Did you like it, or did you feel like some resistance toward it? And again, whatever it is that you're feeling or thinking is perfectly wonderful and fine. The key thing is that you are noticing it and you are naming it and you are writing it down. So again, one more thing. To really work this program that I'm presenting here, I need you to also think about how you will do your reflection, and will you do it regularly? So is it something you can do? And if it is not, why not? What are there barriers? And if you can identify those barriers, think about ways you can find ways to make it a little bit less difficult to make it happen. So one of the things I think often comes up is time, right? I don't have time to sit around and think about how I feel about things yet. And still, that is important to recognize. Why do you think you don't have time? What is it about your context that is making it more important to do something else than to work on your anti-racism practice? So my position is that this work is pretty high up there in the scale of importance, and often the most important work we can be doing if we are really committed to making changes in the system. So again, think about if you can and will, and it's no problem, awesome. But if you feel like there's some resistance or barriers or things that might make it hard, try to identify those and think about ways you can get around them. So that is all I had for you all. I have included the references here for some of the things, the papers I talked about in my presentation. And I also want to just highlight down here Rachel Cargill, who is an anti-racist educator, and this is just a link to her Instagram. She's Googleable. She has lots of wonderful projects going on that you should check out. But her and other thinkers are doing the work for you that can help you expand and understand and deepen your reflective practices to help you start to see some of the things, the ways that white supremacy and racism is working in our world that for me personally, especially with Rachel Cargill, were very eye-opening and continue to be eye-opening. So check her out and others doing similar work. And finally, please reach out to me. I am more than happy to entertain questions, outbursts, outrage, joy, whatever you have. I'm just excited that if you've heard this and it made you think or it made you feel something, that is excellent, that is wonderful. So please reach out if you'd like. And thank you so much for taking the time to think with me, listen with me, learn with me today. And I hope you will take care, and I will maybe hear from you soon.